The components of the conjunctio. 1. The opposites. The factors which come together in the conjunctio are conceived as opposites, either confronting one another in enmity or attracting one another in love. Footnote. Ripley says, the conjunctio is the uniting of separated qualities, or an equalizing of principles. Duodecim portarum axiomata philosophica. Theatrum Chemicum, Part 2, page 128. End of footnote. To begin with, they form a dualism. For instance, the opposites are humidum, moist, siccum, dry, frigidum, cold, calidum, warm, superiora, upper, higher, inferiora, lower, spiritus anima, spirit soul, corpus, body, coelum, heaven, terra, earth, ignis, fire, aqua, water, bright, dark, aegis, active, passions, passive, volatile, gaseous, fixum, solid, pretiosum, precious, costly, also caram, dear, vile, cheap, common, bonum, good, malum, evil, manifestum, open, occultum, occult, also caelatum, hidden, oriens, east, occidens, west, vivum, living, mortem, dead, inert, masculus, masculine, foemina, feminine, sol, luna. Often the polarity is arranged as a quaternion, a quaternity, with the two opposites crossing one another, as for instance, the four elements or the four qualities, moist, dry, cold, warm, or the four directions and seasons. Footnote. The representation of Tetramera in Stolius's the Stolzenberg Viridarium Chemicium, figure 152. End of footnote. Thus producing the cross as an emblem of the four elements and symbol of the subulary physical world. Footnote. Consilium Conigii, Ars Chemica, page 79, quote, in this stone are the four elements, and it is to be compared to the world and the composition of the world. And then for the Latin or Greek of the quotation marked with an asterisk, see Appendix, editors. Also Mike or Mayer, De Circio Physico Quadrato, quote, Nature, I say, when she turned about the golden circle, by that movement made for its four qualities equal, that is to say, she squared that homogeneous simplicity, turning back on itself, or brought it into an equilateral rectangle, in such a way that contraries are bound together by contraries and enemies by enemies, as if with everlasting bonds, and are held in mutual embrace. Petrus Bonus says, quote, the elements are conjoined in the circle of true friendship. Bibliotheca Chemica. End of footnote. This fourfold thesis, the cross, also appears in the signs for Earth. The Earth sign, the Venus sign, the Mercury sign, the Saturn sign, and the Jupiter sign. The opposites and their symbols are so common in the texts that it is superfluous to cite evidence from the sources. On the other hand, in view of the ambiguity of the alchemist's language, which is, quote, tam ethise quam physique, unquote, as much ethical as physical, it is worthwhile to go rather more closely into the manner in which the texts treat the opposites. Very often, the masculine-feminine opposition is personified as king and queen. In the Rosarium Philosophorum, also as emperor and empress, or as service slave in Vir Rubius, red man, and Mulinar Candida, white woman. Footnote. Concilium Conigi, the Klanger Bursini. In the Kabbalah, the situation is reversed. Red denotes the female, white, the left side, the male. End of footnote. Let's go back to where we were. Theriomorphic symbols are equally common and often found in the illustrations. Footnote. The most complete collection of the illustrations that appeared in printed words is Stolzius de Stolzenberg's Viridarium chemicum figuris cupro incisis adornatum, Frankfurt, 1624. End of footnote. I would mention the eagle and toad, the eagle flying through the air and the toad crawling on the ground, which are the emblem of Avicenna in Michael Meyer. The eagle representing Luna, or Juno Venus Bea, who is fugitive and winged like the eagle, which flies up into the clouds and receives the ray of the sun in his eyes. The toad is, quote, the opposite of air. It is a contrary element, namely earth, whereon alone it moves by slow steps and does not trust itself to another element. Its head is very heavy and gazes at the earth. For this reason it denotes the philosophic earth, which cannot fly, i.e., cannot be sublimated. It is firm and solid. Upon it is a foundation, the golden house. Footnote, the treasure house. Gazrophylacium domus Thessaria of philosophy, which the house of philosophy, the treasure house of philosophy, which is a synonym for the Arium Philosophorum, or lapis. Aurora consurgens, the idea goes back to Alphidius, and ultimately to Zosimus, who described the lapis as a shining white temple of marble. Berthelot, Collection des anciens alchimistes grecs. Okay, back to our reading. So, upon it is a foundation of the golden house. We read that footnote. Which is to be built. Were it not for the earth in our work, the air would fly away, and neither would the fire have its nourishment, nor the water its vessel. Another favorite theomorphic image is that of the two birds or two dragons, one of them winged, the other wingless. This allegory comes from an ancient text, De Chemia Signoris Antiquissimi Philosophiae Libellis. Footnote. The printing is undated, but it probably comes from Samuel Emmel's press at Strasbourg and may be contemporaneous with Ars Chemica, which was printed there in 1566 and matches our libellus as regards to type, paper, and format. The author, Senior Zadith Filius Hamuel, may perhaps have been one of the Haranites of the 10th century, or at least have been influenced by them. In the Clavis Majoris Sapitae, mentioned by Stapleton, Muhammad bin Umail, his date, writings, and place in alchemical history, is identical with the Latin treatise of the same name, traditionally ascribed to Artephius. This could be taken as proved, since that treatise contains a typical Haranite astral theory. Ruska, Studens de M. Ibn Umel, groups Senior with the Turba literature that grew up on Egyptian soil. End of footnote. And back to our text. The wingless bird or dragon prevents the other from flying. They stand for Sol and Luna, brother and sister, who are united by means of the art. In Lamsprink's symbols, footnote, Masseum Hermeticum, they appear as the astrological fishes which, swimming in opposite directions, symbolize the spirit-soul polarity. The water they swim in is Mare Nostrum, our sea, and is interpreted as the body. Footnote: corpus, as corpus nostrum, usually means the chemical body or substance, but morally it means the human body. Sea is a common symbol of the unconscious. In alchemy, therefore, the body would also symbolize the unconscious. End of footnote. The fishes are quote, without bones and cortex. Footnote: Enigmata Philosophorum 2. Okay, so they're without the fishes are without bones and cortex. From them is produced a mare immensurum, which is the agua permanens, permanent water. Another symbol is the stag and unicorn, meeting in the quote-unquote forest. The stag signifies the soul, the unicorn, spirit, and the forest, the body. The next two pictures in Lam Springbuck's symbols show the lion and lioness. Footnote: they also appear in Exi Clavis of Basilius Valenus Chemiski Stephen, and in Virdarium. Variants are lions and snakes, lions and bird, lion and bear. Okay. The next two pictures in Lem Springbuck's symbols show the lions and lioness, or the wolf and dog, the latter two fighting. They too symbolize soul and spirit. In figure 7, the opposites are symbolized by two birds in a wood, one fledged, the other unfledged. Whereas in the earlier pictures the conflict seems to be between spirit and soul, the two birds signify the conflict between spirit and body. And in figure 8, the two birds fighting do in fact represent that conflict, as the caption shows. The opposition between spirit and soul is due to the latter having a very fine substance. It is more akin to the hylical body and is densior et crassier, denser and grosser than the spirit. The elevation of the human figure to a king or a divinity, and, on the other hand, its representation in subhuman, theomorphic form, are indications of the trans-conscious character of the pairs of opposites. They do not belong to the ego-personality, but are subordinate to it. The ego-personality occupies an intermediate position, like the anima inter bona et mala situa, soul placed between good and evil. The pairs of opposites constitute the phenomenology of the paradoxical self, man's totality. That is why their symbolism makes use of cosmic expression like coelum terra. Footnote: C.F. Petrus Bonus, Pertosia Margarita Novella. Hermes, at the end of the world, heaven and earth must be joined together, which is the philosophical word. End of footnote. The immensity of the conflict is expressed in symbols like fire and water, height and depth. Footnote: thus the height is hidden and the depth is made manifest. Life and death. Footnote: the oft-repeated saying, "From the dead he makes the living." End of footnote. The Quartinio, part 2, the Quartinio and the mediating role of Mercurius. The arrangement of the opposites in a quartinity is shown in an interesting illustration in Stolzenberg's Viridarium Chemicium, figure 152, which can be found in Philosophia Reformata of Mialis, 1622. The goddesses represent the 4 seasons of the sun in the circle of the zodiac, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, and at the same time the 4 degrees of heating. Footnote: Mylius, the 4th degree is the conjunctio, which would thus respond to Capricorn. End of footnote. So, as well as the four elements combined around the circular table. Footnote. Mylius remarks, equality arises from the four incompatibles mutually partaking in nature. A similar ancient idea seems to be that of the Ilekia Trapezia, the solar table, in the Orphic Mysteries. Cf. Proclus, Commentarius on the Timaeus of Plato. And Orpheus knew indeed of this crater of Bacchus, but he also establishes many others around the solar table. And Pausanias' description of Greece. Herodotus and Pausanias' description of Greece. Okay, end of that footnote. The synthesis of the elements is effected by means of the circular motion in time, circulatio orata, of the sun through the houses of the zodiac. As I have shown elsewhere, footnote, Psychology and Alchemy, Index Rotundum, Sphere, Wheel, and especially the wheel, with 12 buckets for raising souls, in the Arcta Archelae. So as I have shown elsewhere, the aim of the circulatio is the production, or rather reproduction, of the original man who was the sphere. Perhaps I may mention in this connection a remarkable quotation from Ostanis in Abul Qasim, describing the intermediate position between two pairs of opposites constituting a quartinio. Quote, Osanes said, "Save me, O my God, for I stand between two exalted brilliancies, known for their wickedness, and between two dim lights, each of them has reached me, and I know not how to save myself from them. And it was said to me, Go up to the Agathodaimon, the great, and ask aid of him, and know that there is in thee somewhat of his nature, which will never be corrupted. And when I ascended into the air, he said to me, Take the child of the bird, which is mixed with redness, and spread for the gold its bed, which comes forth from the glass, and place it in the vessel whence it has no power to come out, except when thou desirest, and leave it until its moistness has departed." End of quote. The quartinio is in this case evidently consists of the two malefici, Mars and Saturn. Mars is the ruler of Aries, Saturn of Capricorn, and the two dim lights, which would then be feminine ones, the Moon, ruler of Cancer, and Venus, ruler of Libra. The opposites between which Ostanis stands are thus masculine, feminine on the one hand, good, evil on the other. The way he speaks of the four luminaries, he does not know how to save himself from them, suggests he is subject to hymarmene, the compulsion of the stars, that is, to a trans-conscious factor beyond the reach of the human will. Apart from this compulsion, the injurious effect of the four planets is due to the fact that each of them exerts its specific influence on a person and makes them a diversity of persons, whereas a person should be one. Footnote. The idea of uniting the many into one is found not only in alchemy, but also in Origin, Liber Reg. There was one man, quote, there was one man. We, who are still sinners, cannot obtain this title of praise, for each of us is not one but many. See how he who thinks himself one is not one, but seems to have as many personalities as he has moods. As also the scripture says, a fool is changing as the moon. And in another homily in Ezek, he says, Where there are sins, there is multitude, but where virtue is, there is singleness, there is union. Cf. Proferi, the philosopher, to his wife Marcella, If thou wouldst practice to ascend into thyself, collecting together all the powers which the body hath scattered and broken up into a multitude of parts, unlike their former unity. Likewise the Gospel of Philip, cited from Epiphanius Panarium, quote, I have taken knowledge, saith the soul, of myself, and have gathered myself together out of every quarter, and have not begotten, sown, children unto the ruler, but have rooted out his roots and gathered together the members that were scattered abroad. And I know thee who thou art, for I, she saith, am one of them that are from above. James, the Apocryphal New Testament. Cf. also Panarium 26, quote, I am thou, and thou art I, and wherever thou art, there I am, and I am scattered into all things, and from wherever thou wilt, thou canst gather me, but in gathering me, thou gatherest together thyself. Unquote. The inner multiplicity of people reflects their microcosmic nature, which contains within it the stars and their astrological influences. Thus Origen, in Lev Home, says, quote, understand that thou hast within thyself herds of cattle, flocks of sheep, and flocks of goats. Understand that the fowls of the air are also within thee. Marvel not if we say that these are within thee, but understand that thou themselves art another world in little, and hast within thee the sun and the moon, and also the stars. Thou seest that thou hast all these things which the world hath. And Dorn, De Tenebris contra Naturam, says, quote, to the 4 less perfect planets in the heavens there corresponds the 4 elements in our body, that is, earth to Saturn, water to Mercury, instead of the moon, see above, air to Venus, and fire to Mars. Of these it is built up, and it is weak on account of the imperfection of the parts. And so let a tree be planted from them, whose root shall ascribe to Saturn. Meaning the philosophical tree symbol of the developmental process that results in the unity of the filius philosophorum, the philosophical tree. End of footnote. It is presumably Hermes who points out to Ostanes that something incorruptible is in his nature, which he shares with the Agathodaimon. Footnote. The Agathos daimon is a snake-like, cathronic fertility daimon akin to the genius of the hero. In Egypt, as well, it was a snake-like demon giving life and healing power. In the Berlin magic papyrus, it is the Agathos Gurugos who fertilizes the earth. In Gnostic gems, it appears together with the Enoch being an early parallel of Hermes. The Sabaeans, who transmitted the Agathodaimon to the Middle Ages, as well as the Primna Rapidorov, familiar spirit of the magical procedure, identified it with Hermes and Orpheus. Olympidorus mentions it in the more secret angel Mystikautheron Agellan as the Ouroboros or heaven, on which account it later became a symbol for the Mercurius. End of footnote. So, I'll start that sentence since it was a long footnote. It is presumably Hermes who points out to Ostanes that something incorruptible is in his nature, which he shares with the Agathodaimon. There was the footnote. Something divine, obviously the germ of unity. This germ is the gold, the aurum philosophorum. Footnote. The Indian teachings concerning Garba, golden germ, and the Purusha, also the psychology of Eastern meditation. End of footnote. Footnote. The bird of Hermes, or the son of the bird, who is the same as the Filius Philosophorum. Footnote. Uletes ornithagonias, the matter of the generation of the bird, in Zosimos Berthanach 3. End of footnote. He must be enclosed in the vas hermeticum and heated until the moistness that still clings to him has departed, i.e., the humidum radical, the radical moisture, the prima materia, which is the original chaos, and the sea, the unconscious. Some kind of coming to consciousness seems indicated. We know that the synthesis of the four was one of the main preoccupations of alchemy, as was, though to a lesser degree, the synthesis of the seven, metals for instance. Thus in the same text, Hermes says to the sun, I cause to come out to thee the spirits of thy brethren, the planets, O sun, and I make them for thee a crown, the like of which has never been seen. And I cause thee and them to be within me, and I will make thy kingdom vigorous. Footnote. Homiliard, page 37. End of footnote. This refers to the synthesis of the planets or metals within the sun, to form a crown which will be within Hermes. The crown signifies the kingly totality. It stands for unity and is not subject to Hamarmini. This reminds us of the 7 or 12-rayed crown of light which the Agothodaimon serpent wears on Gnostic gems. Footnote. See Psychology and Alchemy, figures 203-5. And also of the crown of wisdom in Aurora Consurgens. A footnote. Von Franz, the crown of victory, Senior, calls the Terra Alba Folita the crown of victory. In Helidori, Carmina, the soul, on returning to the body, brings in it a Nikitikon stemma, a wreath of victory. In the Kabbalah, the highest Saphira, like the lowest, is called Kether, the crown. In Christian allegory, the crown signifies Christ's humanity. Rabanus Maurus, allegory in Sacrum Scripturum. In the Acts of John, Christ is called the diadem. End of footnote. In the Concilium Coniuncti, there is a similar quaternio with the four qualities arranged as combinations of two contraries, cold and moist, which are not friendly to heat and dryness. Footnote, Ars Chemica. And here is a circle with opposites on it. And then the ultimate opposites are celeste and terrestre, and spirituale and corporale. All right, the outside opposites. Other quaternios are: the stone is first an old man, in the end a youth, because of the albedo comes at the beginning and the rubido at the end. Footnote. Opusculum autoris ignoti. The author is generally cited as Rhasis. And Himai et Ceremonis, quote, Thy babe, O Virgin, is an old man. He is the Ancient of Days, and precedeth all time. End of footnote. Let's see. Let's find our place again. So, similarly, the elements are arranged as two manifesta, water and earth, and two occulta, air and fire. Another footnote. Dorn in Psychica Tris Megisti, the division of the elements into 2 higher psychic elements and 2 lower somatic elements goes back to Aristotle. Lippmann, Ichthung und Ausbreitung der Alchemie, Liber de Alchemie. Okay, and a footnote. A further quatinio is suggested by the saying of Bernardus Trivisanus, quote, "The upper has the nature of the lower, and the ascending has the nature of the descending." Footnote, Liber de Alchemia. And a footnote. The following combination is from the Tractus Muceris. Quote, "In it, the Indian Ocean," footnote, "the sea is a synonym for the prima materia," end of footnote. So in it, the Indian Ocean, are images of heaven and earth, of summer, autumn, winter, and spring, male and female. If thou callest the spiritual, what thou doest is probable. If corporal, thou sayest the truth. If heavenly, thou liest not. If earthly, thou hast well spoken. Footnote. Theater Chem. This treatise, Mercurius equals Mercurius, is undoubtedly old and is probably of Arabic origin. The same saying is quoted by Milvesindus Bonus, Pritiosa Marnov. In the Turba he is called Mirni Findus. End of footnote. Here we are dealing with a double quatinio, having the structure shown in diagram on page 10. And this is what I talked about. There's a circle, and in it are 3 lines, so that you have like a star shape inside, and then there's opposites on each end. On the outside of the circle, on the top and bottom, and on the right and left are these words. On the top, celeste, on the bottom, terrestre, and then on the right, corporeal, and on the left, spirituale. And then we have the seasons, ver under spirituale, autumnus under corporal, aistus under celeste, hymens under over the earth, and then the other opposites are masculinus and femininus, and then terra and coelum. Okay, so that's the figure, the double quatinio. The double quatinio, or ogdoad, stands for a totality, for something that is at once heavenly and earthly, spiritual or corporal, and is found in the Indian Ocean, that is to say, in the unconscious. It is without doubt the microcosm, the mystical Adam, and the bisexual original man in his prenatal state, as it were, where he is identical with the unconscious. Hence, in Gnosticism, the Father of all is described not only as masculine and feminine, or neither, but as Bythos, the abyss. In the Scholiastia to the Tractatus Aureus Hermetis, footnote, this treatise of Arabic origin is printed in Bibliotheca Chemica. End of footnote. So, in the Scholia Tractatus Aureus Hermetis, there is a quatinio consisting of superius, inferius, externus, internus. They are united into one thing by means of the circular distillation named pelican. Footnote. For when she applies her beak to her breast, her whole neck, with the beak, is bent into the shape of a circle. The blood flowing from her breast restores life to the dead fledglings. End of footnote. Quote, "Let all be one in one circle or vessel, for this vessel is the true philosophical pelican, nor is any other to be sought after in all the world." Unquote. This text gives the following diagram. So here we have 2 circles, and on the inside circle there are lines that divide that section between the inside and outside into equal spaces. And then we have the labeling on the outside of the different areas. Inside, the very center is A, and then on the west is B, on the east is D, on the north is C and the south is E. And then in the northeast inside is F, and in the the northwest inside section is F, and the northeast, and the south west inside section is G. Sorry, that's very clear. So B, C, D, E represent the outside. So that's on the very outside on the edges, the tops and the bottoms. A is the inside, that's the center. As it were, the origin and the source from which the other letters flow, and likewise the final goal to which they flow back. F and G, which remember are on the section between the inside and the outside, so they're on the west side, one on the south and one on the north. F and G stand for above and below. Together, the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G clearly signify the hidden magical septernity. End of quote. This central point A, their origin and goal, the ocean or great sea, is also the circulus exigis, very small circle, and a mediator making peace between the enemies or elements, that they may love one another and meet in embrace. Footnote. The words of the bride in Aurora Consurgens, quote, I am the mediatrix of the elements, making one to agree with another. That which is warm I make cold, that which is dry I make moist, and that which is hard I soften. And the reverse. End of footnote. This little circle corresponds to the mercurial fountain in the Rosarium, which I have described in my Psychology of the Transference. The text calls it the more spiritual, perfect, and nobler Mercurius. And footnote. Luke, recently, within you, intra vos, entos umon, has been translated as among you. Therefore, as our author says, quote, in the visible and bodily gathering together of people, unquote. This shows the modern tendency to replace people's inner cohesion by outward community, as though anyone who had no communion with themselves would be capable of any fellowship at all. It is this deplorable tendency that paves the way for mass-mindedness. End of footnote. So the text calls it the spiritual, perfect, and nobler Mercurius. And that's a footnote. The true arcane substance, a spirit, and goes on. For the spirit alone penetrates all things, even the most solid bodies. Footnote. It will penetrate every solid thing. Tabula smaragdina. The sentence for the spirit alone penetrates all things, even the most solid bodies, is probably not without reference to, quote, for the Spirit searches all things, yea, the deep things of God, in currents. Otherwise, the Mercurius of the alchemists is a, quote, spirit of truth, a sapientia Dei, but one whose presses downward into the depths of matter, and whose acquisition is the donum spiritus sancti. He is a spirit who knows the secrets of matter, and to possess him brings illumination, in accordance with Paul's. Even so the things of God knoweth no man, but the Spirit of God. End of footnote. Thus the Catholicity of religion, or of the true church, consists not in the visible and bodily gathering together of people, but in the invisible, spiritual concord and harmony of those who believe devoutly and truly in the one Jesus Christ. Whoever attaches themselves to a particular church outside this King of Kings, who alone is the shepherd of the true spiritual church, is a sectarian, a schismatic, and a heretic. For the kingdom of God cometh not with observation, but within us, as our Saviour himself says in the 17th chapter of St. Luke. End of this quote, and the last footnote to it. Luke 17, recently within you, intra vos epinon, has been... I already read that one, so I read that one wrong for something else, sorry. I'll read it again. Has been translated as among you, therefore, as our author says, in the invisible and bodily gathering together of men, there shows the modern tendency to replace man's inner cohesion of outward community, as though anyone who had no communion with himself would be capable of any fellowship at all. It is this deplorable tendency that paves the way for mass-mindedness. Well, I guess it was my unconscious that wanted to read that twice. The footnote that I thought was for 45 is actually just a simple citation to a book. So it's nice to read it twice because it's a pretty powerful footnote. Okay, we continue. That the Ecclesia Spiritualis is clear from the text. Quote, "But you will ask, where then are those true Christians who are free from all sectarian contagion? They are," quote, "neither in Samaria, nor in Jerusalem, nor in Rome, nor in Geneva, nor in Leipzig, but are scattered everywhere throughout the world, in Turkey, in Persia, Italy, Gaul, Germany, Poland, Bohemia, Moravia, England, America, and even furthest in India." End quote. The author continues, quote, "God is spirit," and footnote, "prima o Theus," end of footnote. "And those who worship him must worship him in the spirit and in truth. After those examinations and avowals, I will leave it to each person to judge who is of the true church and who is not." Footnote, Bible Chem, end of footnote. From this remarkable exertus we learn, first of all, that the center unites the 4 and the 7 into one. Footnote. In his Speculativa Philosophica, Dorn says of this union, quote, "Such is the philosophical love between the parts of innate things and the enmity, also as between the parts of men," an allusion to projection. "But no more is the former than in the latter can there be a true union, unless the corruption of said parts be removed before they are joined together. Wherefore, that which thou doest is for the sake of peace between enemies, that friends may come together in unity. In all imperfect bodies, and those who fall short of their ultimate perfection, friendship and enmity are both innate, an apt formulation of the coexistence of opposites in the unconscious imperfect state. So friendship and enmity are both innate. If the latter be removed by the work or effort of people, needs must the other return to its ultimate perfection through the art which we have set forth in the union of people." End of footnote. The unifying agent is a spirit Mercurius, and this singular spirit then causes the author to confess himself a member of the Ecclesia Spiritualis, for the spirit is God. This religious background is already apparent in the choice of the term pelican for the circular process, since the bird is a well-known allegory of Christ. Footnote. Honorius of Autumn, Speculum de Mysteriis Ecclesiae, quote, "For it is said that the pelican so loves her young that she puts them to death with her claws. But on the 3rd day, for grief, she wounds herself, and letting the blood from her body drip upon the fledglings, she raises them from the dead. The pelican signifies the Lord, who so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, whom on the 3rd day he raised up, victor over death, and exalted above every name. Pelicanal is also the name of a retort, the spout of which runs back into the belly of the vessel." End of footnote. The idea of Mercurius as a peacemaker, the mediator between the warring elements and producer of unity, probably goes back to Ephrasius. But now in Christ Jesus, you who once were far off have been brought near in the blood of Christ. For he is our peace, who has made both one, and has broken down the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing in his flesh the law of commandments and ordinances, that he might create in himself one new person in place of two, so making peace, and might reconcile both to God in one body through the cross, thereby bringing the hostility to an end. And he came and preached peace to you who were far off, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access in one Spirit to the Father. So then you are no longer strangers and sojourners, but you are fellow citizens with the saints and the members of the household of God, built upon the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole structure is joined together and grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you are also built into it for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. Footnote. The comment on 2 Corinthians. For the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life, in Olympiodoros, where one with knowledge of the hidden alchemical art is speaking, quote, how then do I understand the transformation metaboline? How are the water and the fire hostile and opposed to one another by nature? How are they come together in one through harmony and friendship? End of footnote. In elucidating the alchemical parallel, we should note that the author of the Scholia to the Tractus Aureus Hermetis prefaces his account of the union of opposites with the following remark, quote, finally, they will appear in the work that ardently desired blue or cerulean color, which does not darken or dull the eyes of the beholder by the healing power of its brilliance, as when we see the splendor of the outward sun. Rather does it sharpen and strengthen them, nor does he, Mercurius, slay a man with his glance, like the basilisk, but by the shedding of his own blood he calls back those who are near to death, and restores them unimpaired their former life, like the pelican. Footnote. The aqua premens, whose power is the spiritual blood, that is, the tincture. For the body incorporates the spirit through the tincture of the blood. For all that has spirit has also blood. These quotations come from Turba and from the book by Al-Habib. For the Greek alchemists, gold was the, quote, red blood of silver. Also, Philo questions in Genesium, quote, but blood is the essence of the sensible and vital spirit. For he says in another place, the spirit of all flesh is its blood. End of footnote. Mercurius is conceived as spiritual blood. I just read that footnote. So that footnote I just read goes for this. So Mercurius is conceived as spiritual blood, as on the analogy of the blood of Christ. Just to say that the other footnote was just a citation. So in Ephesus, those who are separated, quote, are brought near the blood of Christ. He makes the two one and has broken down the dividing wall in his flesh. Caro, flesh. Footnote 53. Son, you must take off the fatter flesh. Quotation from Aristotle in Rosarium Philosophorum. The prima materia, quote, grows from flesh and blood. Mohammed in Rosinius ad Saratanum. To take the egg in the flesh. Laurentius Ventura, Theatre Chemical. Choose the tender flesh and you shall have the most excellent thing. Flesh and blood corresponds to the inner and hidden fire, Dorn, Theatre Chemica. For the patristic view, see Augustine, Questions in Heptaticum. Perhaps he who has delivered our transgressions, Christ, is signified by the flesh at evening. End of footnote. So, in his flesh, caro, flesh, is a synonym for the prima materia, and hence for Mercurius. The one is a new man. He reconciles the two in one body. Footnote. As Christ in the Holy Scriptures is called the stone, rejected by the builders, so also doth the same befall the stone of the wise. Epigolas Orthinli. End of footnote. So he reconciles the two in one, there was a footnote, an idea which is figuratively represented in alchemy as the two-headed hermaphrodite. The two have one spirit. In alchemy they have one soul. Further, the lapis is frequently compared to Christ as the lapis angularis, cornerstone. Footnote. As Christ in the Holy Scriptures is called the stone rejected by the builders. Okay, I seem to be getting my footnotes all wrong. So also doth the same befall the stone of the wise. Well, bear with me. We keep going. As we know, the temple built upon the foundation of the saints, inspired in the Shepherd of Hermans, a vision of the great building into which human beings, streaming from the four quarters, inserted themselves as living stones, melting into it without seam. Footnote, the Shepherd of Hermanus. That actually was the footnote. The church is built upon the rock that gave Peter his name. In addition, we learn from the Scholia that the circle and the hermetic vessel are one and the same, with the result that the mandala, which we find so often in the drawings of our patients, corresponds to the vessel of transformation. Consequently, the usual quaternity structure of the mandala, footnote, a study in the process of individuation, end of footnote, would coincide with the alchemist's quaternio of opposites. Lastly, there is the interesting statement that an ecclesia spiritualis above all creeds and owing allegiance solely to Christ, the anthropos, is the real aim of the alchemist's endeavors, whereas the treatise of Hermes is, comparatively speaking, very old, and in place of the Christian anthropos mystery. Footnote, Schweitzer's view of Christian concepts as late Jewish eschatology. End of footnote. So, in place of the Christian anthropos mystery, contains a peculiar paraphrase of it, or rather, its antique parallel. Footnote, this text is in Psychology and Alchemy. Paragraph 454. End of footnote. The Scholia cannot be dated earlier than the beginning of the 17th century. Footnote. What would appear to be the first edition of the Scholia, dated 1610, was published in Leipzig under the title Hermetis Trismegisti Tractatus Vere Aureus de Lapidis Philosophici Secreto. The Scholia are also printed in Alchemy, but there the author is said to be anonymous. End of footnote. The author seems to have been a Paracelsus physician. Mercurius corresponds to the Holy Ghost, as well as to the Anthropos. He is, as Gerhard Dorn says, quote, the true hermaphroditic atom and microcosm. Here another quote. One Mercurius is therefore the same microcosm, who contains within him the perfections, virtues, and powers of soul, in the dual sense of sun and gold, and who goes through the streets, vicos, and houses of all the planets, and in his regeneration has obtained the power of above and below. Wherefore he is to be likened to their marriage, as is evident from the white and the red that are conjoined in him. The sages have affirmed in their wisdom that all creatures are to be brought to one united substance. Accordingly, Mercurius, in the crude form of the prima materia, is in very truth the original man disseminated through the physical world. In his sublimated form, he is that reconstituted totality. Footnote, in Ora Consurgens, the atom composed of the four elements is contrasted with the atom from pure elements, who, as the concluding sentence shows, is produced by the circulation of the four elements. End of footnote. Altogether, he is very like the Redeemer of the Basilidians, who mounts upward through their planetary spheres, conquering them or robbing them of their power. The remark that he contains the powers of soul remind us of the above-mentioned passage in Abul Qasim, where Hermes says he unites the sun and the planets and causes them to be within him as a crown. This may be the origin of the designation of the lapis as the crown of victory. Footnotes. Grateronis vere alchemy. And footnote. The power of above and below refer to the ancient authority of the tabula smaragdina, which is of Alexandrian origin. Footnote. Quote, he receives the power of the higher and the lower things. So shall you have the glory of the whole world. Tabula smaragdina. Also, Ruska tabula smaragdina. End of footnote. Besides this, our text contains allusions to the Song of Songs. Quote, through the streets and houses of the planets recalls Song of Songs 3:2. Quote, I will go about the city in the streets, and in the broad ways I will seek him whom my soul loveth. Footnote. Aura consurgens. End footnote. The white and red of Mercurius refers to 5:10. Quote, my beloved is white and ruddy. Unquote. He is likened to the matrimonium or conjunctio. That is to say, he is this marriage on account of his androgynous form. Part 3. The Orphan, the Widow, and the Moon. In the text cited at the end of the last section, Dorn continues, quote, Hermes Trismegistus calls the stone Orphan. Footnote. I do not know to which Hermes text Dorn is referring here. The Orphan first appears in the Preciosa Margarita novella of Petrus Bonus. Quote, the Orphan stone has no proper name. It is also in the edition of Janus Laxinius. End of footnote. So, Orphan, as the name of a precious stone, is found in Albertus Magnus. The stone was called Orphan because of its uniqueness. It was never seen elsewhere, and it was said to be in the emperor's crown. It is wine-colored and sometimes shone in night, but nowadays it does not shine any more in the darkness. Footnote. Du Clang Glossier Orphanus. And footnotes. As Albertus Magnus was the authority on alchemy, he may have been the direct source both for Dorn and for Petrus Bonus. Orphan, as the name of a gem, may therefore mean something like the modern solitaire, a very apt name for the unique lapis philosophorum. Apart from Dorn and Petrus Bonus, it seems that this name is found only in the Carmina Heliodori. Footnote. Heliodorus was a Byzantine of the 8th century. Casal gives Arnold, cited in Lesser Lithiology as the source of Orpheus. I was unable to verify this statement. End of footnote. There it refers to the Orphanos exoikos, homeless orphan, who is slain at the beginning of the work for purposes of transformation. The terms son of the widow and children of the widow appear to be of Manichaean origin. The Manichaeans themselves were called children of the widow. Footnote. It is said that in the Book of Secrets, Mani spoke of son of the widow. Jesus, Schneider, Bousset mentions that the reign of a widow who will precede the Antichrist, according to a Greek and Armenian apocalypse of Daniel. Freemasons are also reckoned among the children of the widow Eckert, de Mysterium de Heidenkirche, ihr Halten und Fortgebilden im Bund der Alten und Neuem Kinder der Witwe. Widow is the Kabbalah. In the Kabbalah, widow in the Kabbalah is a designation for Malchuth. End of footnote. The orphan referred to by Hermes must therefore have his counterpart, a vidua, a widow, as the prima materia. For this there are synonyms such as mater, matrix, Venus, regina, femina, virgo, puella, pregans, virgin in the center of the earth, footnote, Mylius, and the footnotes, luna, meretrix, whore, vetula, old woman, more specifically vetua extinauta, enfeebled, exhausted. Footnote, this expression appears for the first time in Aurora Consurgens. So Mylius copies it. The wheel externe, vieille, not wheel, the vieille externe, mentioned in Perneti, goes back to the same source. Cf. also, quote, a mistress of about 100 years of age, and in Aureum Secelium Redivitium. End of footnote. Mater Alchemia, who is dropsical in the lower limbs and paralyzed from the knees down. And finally, Viraggio. All these synonyms allude to the virginal or maternal quality of the prima materia, which exists without man. This footnote, in Auroria Consurgens, 7 women seek 1 husband, end footnote, and yet is the matter of all things. Footnote, in Matrices of All Things, in Rudalunus, Lexicon of Alchemy, and footnote. Above all, the prima materia is the mother of the lapis, the filius philosophorum. Michael Mayer mentions the treaty of an anonymous author, Delphinius, which he dates to some time before 1447. Footnote, printed in Theatra Chemica under the title Antiquity Philosophiae Galli Delphaniti Enomini Liber Secati Maximi Totius Mundane Gloriae. End of footnote. He stresses that this author insisted particularly on the mother-son incest. Mayer even constructs a genealogical tree, showing the origin of the 7 metals. At the top of the tree is the lapis. Its father is Gabritius, who in turn was born of Isis and Osiris. After the death of Osiris, Isis married their son, Gabritius. Footnote. And where's that footnote? Okay, Gabritius therefore corresponds to Horus. In ancient Egypt, Horus has long been equated with Osiris. Brucht, the papyrus Minimet has, quote, do the terrible deed to me, the orphan of the honored widow. Precedence relates the widow to Isis and the orphan to Horus, with whom the magician identifies himself. We find the medicine of the widow in the treatise Isis to Horus. Berthe Lot. End of footnote. So I'll start that sentence again. After the death of Osiris, Isis has married their son, Gebritius, and there's the footnote. She is identified with Bea. The widow marries her son. The widow appears here as the classical figure of the mourning Isis. To this event, Mayer devotes a special epithalamium in honor of the nuptials of Mother Bea and her son Gabritius. Footnote. Symbol or messe The epithalamium begins with the words, quote, "When the mother is joined with the son, is the covenant of marriage. Count it not as incest. For so doth nature ordain, so doth the holy law of fate require, and the thing is not unpleasing to God." End footnote. But this marriage, which was begun with the expression of great joyfulness, ended in bitterness and mourning, says Meyer, adding the verse, "Within the flower itself there grows the gnawing canker. Where honey is, there gall. Where swelling breast, the chancre." Footnote. In Greco-Roman times, Isis was represented as a human-headed snake. Illustration in Irman. For Isis, Drakan, see Reitzenstein, Poimandres. End of footnote. For, quote, "When the son sleeps with the mother, she kills him with a stroke of a viper. Viperino coronatu." This viciousness recalls the murderous role of Isis. Footnote. In Greco-Roman times, oh sorry, I already read that one. The other footnote was, let's see what the other footnote was. The Latin for "when the flower itself there grows the gnawing canker, their honey is, their gall, their where swelling beast the chancre," which is "es quod in ipis floribus angat, et ubi mele ibi fele ubi uber ibi tuber." That's the Latin part. Okay, we go on. This viciousness recalls the murderous role of Isis, where he did that. Footnote. "Who laid the noble woman in the path of the heavenly Father." Ra, 82. Irman. The text derives from the time of the New Kingdom. End of footnote. Isis, however, is also the healer, for she not only cured Ra of the poisoning, but put together the dismembered Osiris. As such, she personifies the arcane substance, be it dew. Footnote. Precedence, papyri Greek, Ramani, "I am Iris, who am called dew." Or the aqua permanens. Footnote. Synonymous with aqua vita, the relation of the soul-comforting water of the Nile to Isis is indicated on a bas-relief in the Vatican of a priestess of Isis bearing the situla water vessel. The two great parallels are the cup of water in the early Christian communion and the water vessel of Amitabha. For the Christian cup of water, see transformation symbolism on the Mass. For the holy water in the worship of Amitabha, see Hastings, Encyclopedia Amitaios. End of footnote. Okay. So there's aqua permanens, which unites the hostile elements into one. This synthesis is described in the myth of Isis, quote, "who collected the scattered limbs of his body and bathed them with her tears and laid them in a secret grave beneath the bank of the Nile." Footnote. Latin. Figurarum Egyptorium secretorium. End footnotes. The cognomen of Isis was Ximia, the Black One. Footnote. Iser. End of footnote. Apuleius stresses the blackness of her robe. Pala nigra rima, robe of the deepest black. Footnote. The golden ass. 11. Utterly dark cloak. End of footnote. And since ancient times, she was reputed to possess the elixir of life. Diodorus. Ta theos Athanaseos Firmakov. The elixir of life, as well as being adept in sundry magical arts. She tried to make the child of the king of Phoenicia immortal by holding him in the fire. Plutarch, Isis and Osiris. End of footnote. She is also called the Old One. Diodorus is the footnote. And she was rated a pupil of Hermes, or even his daughter. Footnote. The great Paris magic papyrus. End of footnote. She appears as a teacher of alchemy in the treatise Isis the Prophetess to her son Horus. Footnote. Isis Pathitis Tania Are. She is mentioned in the role of a whore in Epiphanius, where she is said to have prostituted herself in Tyre. Footnote. Anacorus. End footnote. She signifies earth, according to Firmicius Maternus. Footnote. Libra de ere profaneum religionum. Quote, the earth is the body of Isis. End of footnote. And was equated with Sophia. Footnote. Reisenstein, etc. She is Myria Nemos, 1,000 names. The vessel and the matter, Xara Kai Ulle, of good and evil. Plutarch, footnote. Plutarch. She is the moon, Plutarch Reisenstein. An inscription invokes her as the one who art all. Footnotes. Corpus Inscriptorium Latinorium. Te tibi unaque es omnia dea Isis. Aureus bal bisis vese, V would be w, now in Naples Museum. She is named Saphira, the Redemptrix. Reichenstein. Athenagoras, she is, quote, the nature of the aeon, Aeon, whence all things grew and by which all things are. Footnote. Athenagoras. All these statements apply just as well to the prima materia in its feminine aspect. It is the moon, the mother of all things, the vessel. It constitutes opposites, has 1,000 names, is an old woman and a whore, a mater alchemia in its wisdom, and teaches wisdom. It contains the elixir of life and potential, and is the mother of the Saviour, and of the filius macrocosmi. It is the earth and the serpent hidden in the earth, the blackness and the dew and the miraculous water, which brings together all that is divided. The water is therefore called mother, quote, my mother who is my enemy, unquote, but who also, quote, gathers together all my divided and scattered limbs, unquote. Footnote. Vrosfil art auruf, the so-called dicta Bellini, al gore serpatiam, and a footnote. The Turba says, Sermo 59, quote, nevertheless the philosophers have put to death the woman who slays her husbands, for the body of that woman is full of weapons and poisons. Let a grave be dug for that dragon, and let that woman be buried with him, he being chained fast to that woman. And the more he winds and coils himself about her, the more he be cut to pieces by the female weapons, which are fashioned in the body of the woman. And when he sees that he is mingled with the limbs of the woman, he will be certain of death, and will be changed wholly into blood. And when the philosophers see him changed into blood, they leave him a few days in the sun, until his softness is consumed, and the blood dries, and they find that poison. When then appears is the hidden wind. Footnote. Ruska. The wind is the pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A, hidden in the prima materia. The final illustration in the Myers Scrutitorium Chemicum shows this burial. And a footnote. The Conunctio can therefore take more gruesome forms than the relatively harmless one depicted in Rosarium. Footnote. Also the maxiphilia, female combat, in Carmen Achille, one of the Carmina Helidori, where the materia flees under the rain of projectiles and ends up as a corpse in the grave. End of footnote. It is clear that these parallels that Meyer was fully justified in giving the name Isis to the prima materia, or feminine transformative substance. Footnote. The corresponding masculine substance is red sulfur, or vir, or Cervus rubeus, whose redness relates him to Typhon. In the dirge for Gabricus, who died after recently celebrating his marriage, Meyer does, in fact, let's go to the next page, mention Typhon as a possible cause of his death. He begins saying, quote, "She who was the cause of your life is also the cause of your death." But then he adds, three there seem to be who may have caused your death: Typhon, your mother, and Mosibir's, Vulcan's furnace. He, Typhon, scatters the limbs of your body. It may be your mother alone instead of your brother, but your mother feigns innocence. It is clear that Meyer suspected the mother in particular, and wants to make Typhon, the red slave, only a cause ministerialis. End of footnote. As Querini has brilliantly shown using the example of Medea, footnote, let's see, where is it? There it is. Querini. Okay. There is in that myth a typical combination of various motifs: love, trickery, cruelty, motherliness, murder of relatives and children, magic, rejuvenation, and gold. Footnote. For this reason, the story of Medea's murder of Creon, her father-in-law, was also interpreted as an alchemical arcanum. End of footnote. This same combination appears in Isis and in the Prima Materia, and forms the core of the drama instigated by the mother world, without which no union seems possible. In Christian tradition, the widow signifies the church. In St. Gregory, footnote, super Ezekiel home, the analogy is the story of the widow's curse of oil, Kings 2 Kings 4. St. Augustine says, quote, "The whole church is one widow, desolate in this world." Footnote, expulsions of the book of Psalms. And footnote, "She, quote, lacketh a husband, lacketh a man, for her bridegroom has not yet come. So too the soul is destitute in the world. But," Augustine continues, "thou art not an orphan. Thou art not reckoned as a widow. Thou hast a friend. Thou art God's orphan, God's widow." Footnote, expulsions of the book of Psalms. End of footnote. Another tradition to be considered in regard to the widow is the Kabbalah. There, the abandoned Mulchuth is the widow, as Nor von Rosenroth says. Almana, widow, this is Malkuth. There, when Tifereth is not with her. Footnote. Kabbalah denudata. Source is Moses Cordovero. End of footnote. Tifereth is the sun. Let's see. Footnote. Malkuth means kingdom, dominion. So as the sun, so Tifereth is the sun, is interpreted by Richelieu as the microcosm. Malkuth, footnote, Malchuth means kingdom, dominion. Oh, Tifereth means beauty. Okay, so Tifereth means beauty, Malchuth means kingdom, dominion. Malchuth is Domina, the mistress. She is also Shekinah. Footnote, she is called moon, earth, bride, matron, queen of heaven, fish pool, sea, well, tree of knowledge of good and evil, hind of loves, so the Malchuth especially called because of the mystery of the new moon, belly, etc. So she is also called Shekinah, the indwelling of God, and Virajo. The Saphira Triferth is the king, and in the usual arrangement of the Saphira he occupied the second place. then here a list. Kether, Triferth, Yesod, Malkuth. Truth, not truth. Kether, the crown, corresponds to the upward growing root of the tree of Sephiroth. Footnote. According to some authorities, Saphira is derived from Sophia, Hastings Encyclopedia. Kabbalah. According to a more recent view, the word is derived from the root sphere, primordial number. Major trends in Jewish mysticism. From the tree of selfless, see the philosophical tree. End of footnote. Yesod, footnote, Yesod means fountain. In the MS, in the Bibliothèque Nationale, Yesod is depicted like the Son of Man in Revelation, with the 7 stars in his right hand, and the sword issuing from his mouth, and standing between the 7 candlesticks. End of footnote. So let's see. Yesod signifies the genital region of the original man, whose head is Kether, Malchuth, conforming to the archetypical pattern, is the underlying feminine principle. Footnote, Kabbalah Denuda. For Malchuth shall be called a watered garden. Isaiah. When Yesod is in her and fills her and waters her with waters from on high, when Malchuth receives the inflowing from the 50 gates through Yesod, then is she called bride, for Yesoth as membrem genitale, and Herwitz. Okay, end of footnote. In this wicked world ruled by evil, Triferth is not united with Malchuth. Footnote. The legend of Father Oceanus and Mother Tethys, who could no longer come together in a conjugal embrace. And then Iliad and Rostre lexicon. This reference points only to the similarity of the motif, not an equivalence of meaning. End of footnote. Okay. But the coming Messiah will reunite the king and the queen, and this mating will restore to God his original unity. Footnote. The cohabitation of Gabriacus and Beira brought about by the intervention of the philosophers. End footnote. The Kabbalah develops an elaborate hierogamos fantasy which expatiates on the union of the soul and the Sephiroth of the worlds of light and darkness. Quote, for the desire of the upper world for the God-fearing man is as the loving desire of a man for his wife when he woos her. Footnote. Der Zohar. There is a parallel to this in the psychotic experiences of Schreber, Memories of My Nervous Illness, where the rays of God longingly seek to enter him. End footnote. Conversely, the Shekinah is present in the sexual act. Quote, the absconditus sponsus enters into the body of the woman and is joined with the abscondita sponsa. This is true also on the reverse sides of the process, and so that the two spirits are melted together and are interchanged constantly between body and body. In the indistinguishable state which arises, it may be said almost that the male is with the female, neither male nor female, or at least they are both or either. So, footnote. Let's see. The parallel in the Gospel, according to the Egyptians, quote, when the two become one, and the male and the female is neither male or female, end quote. So is man affirmed to be composed of the world above, which is male, and the female world below. The same is true of woman. Footnote. Wait. Okay. The Kabbalah also speaks of the thalamus bride chamber, or nuptial canopy beneath which sponsus and sponsa are consecrated. Yesod acting as para-nymphos best man. Footnote. A Kabbalah denudata. Directly or indirectly, the Kabbalah was assimilated into alchemy. Relationships must have existed between them at a very early date, though it is difficult to trace them in the source. late in the 16th century, we come upon a direct quotation from the Zohar. For instance, in the treatise De Inge et Sal by Blasius Virgeneres, footnote 127. Blaise de Virgenere, or Vigenere, was a learned scholar of Hebrew. He was secretary to the Duc de Nevers, and then to Henry III of France. End of footnote. One passage in this treatise is of a special interest to us as it concerns the mythologium of the Conjunctio. Quote, the Sephiroth end in Mulkath, or the moon, who is the last to descend and the first to ascend from the eternal world. For the moon is the way to heaven, so much so that the Pythagoreans named her the heavenly body and the earthly heaven or star. Footnote. Proclus commentaries on the Timaeus of Plato, where he says that Orpheus called the moon the heavenly earth, and the Pythagoreans the aesthetic earth. End of footnote. Because in the elemental world all inferior nature is because in the elemental world all inferior nature in respect to the heavenly, and the heavenly in respect to the intelligible world is, as the Zohar says, feminine and passive, and is as the moon to the sun. In the same measure as the moon withdraws from the sun until she is in opposition to him, so does her light increase in relation to us in this lower world, but diminishes on the side that it looks upward. Contrariwise, in her conjunction, when she is totally darkened for us, she is fully illuminated on that side which faces the sun. This should teach us that the more our intellect descends to the things of sense, the more it is turned away from intelligible things, and the reverse likewise. Footnote. Malchuth is also called moon. Other cognomens are house and night, and in Joseph Gikara Tila, Share Ora, fountain, sea, stone, sapphire, tree of knowledge, land of life. This information was supplied by Dr. S. Hurwitz. Malkuth is the kingdom of God described in the Zohar as Knesset Israel, quote, the mystical archetype of the community of Israel. Scholium, page 213. Okay, end of footnote. The identification of Malkuth with Luna forms a link with alchemy and is another example of the process by which the patristic symbolism of sponsus and sponsa have been assimilated much earlier. At the same time, it is a repetition by way the originally pagan hierogamos were absorbed into the figurative language of the Church Fathers. But Vigernerus adds something that seems to be lacking in patristic allegory, namely the darkening of the other half of the moon during her opposition. When the moon turns upon us her fullest radiance, her other side is in complete darkness. This strict application of the Sol-Luna allegory might have been an embarrassment to the Church, although the idea of the dying Church does not take account, to a certain extent, of the transience of all created things. I do not mention this fact in order to criticize the significance of the ecclesiastical Sol-Luna allegory. On the contrary, I want to emphasize it because the moon, standing on the borders of the sublunary world ruled by evil, has a share not only in the world of light, but also of the demonic world of darkness, as our author clearly hints. This is why her changefulness is so significant symbolically. She is duplex and mutable, like Mercurius, and is like him a mediator, hence their identification in alchemy. Footnote. Jung, the spirit Mercurius. End of footnote. Though Mercurius has a bright side concerning whose spirituality alchemy leaves us in no doubt, he also has a dark side, and its roots go deep. The quotation from Virginius bears no little resemblance to a long passage on the phases of the moon in Augustine. Speaking of the unfavorable aspect of the moon, which is her changeability, he paraphrases Ecclesiasticus with the words, quote, "The wise man remaineth stable as the sun, but a fool is changed as the moon." Footnote. The Vulgate has Homo sanctus in septintia manet sicut sol nam stultus sicut luna mutator. A holy man continueth in wisdom as the sun, but a fool is changed as the moon. End of footnote. And poses the question, who then is that fool who changeth as the moon, but Adam, in whom all have sinned? Footnote. Quis ergo es ille stultus, qui tamquam luna mutater, nisi Adam, in quo omnes peccaverunt. End of footnote. For Augustine, therefore, the moon is manifestly an ally of corruptible character, reflecting their folly and inconstancy. Since, for the men of antiquity and for the Middle Ages, comparison with the stars or planets tacitly presupposes astrological causality. The sun causes constancy and wisdom, while the moon is the cause of change and folly, including lunacy. Footnote. Soul corresponds to the conscious man, luna to the unconscious one, i.e. his anima. End of footnote. Augustine attaches to his remarks about the moon a moral observation concerning the relationship of man to the spiritual sun. Footnote. For man's soul, quote, "For man's soul, when it turns away from the sun of righteousness, that is, from inward contemplation of the unchangeable truth, turns all its strength to earthly things, and thereby is darkened more and more in its inward and higher parts. But when it begins to return to that unchangeable wisdom, the more it draws nigh thereto in loving affection, the more is the outward man corrupted, but the inward man is renewed from day to day, and all that light of natural disposition which was turned towards lower things is directed to the higher, and in certain wise is taken away from things of earth, that it may die more and more in this world, and be its life, and its life be hid with Christ in God. End of footnote. So, Augustine attaches to his remarks about the moon a moral observation concerning the relationship of man to the spiritual sun. We just read that. Footnote. Just as Virginius did, who was obviously acquainted with Augustine's epistles. He also mentions Epistola 55:10, the church as Luna, and he connects the moon with the wounding by an arrow. Quote, whence it is said, they have made ready their arrows in the quiver, to shoot in the darkness of the moon at the upright of heart. Footnote. Undi illud para vertum sagittatas suas in faretra ut sagittent in obscura luna rectos corde. The Vulgate Psalm 10:3 has only in obscura, quote, for behold the wicked bent their bow, and fit the arrow to the string, to shoot in the darkness of the upright of heart. Cf. the arrows drunk with blood in Aurora Consurgens. End of footnote. It is clear that Augustine did not understand the wounding as the activity of the new moon herself, but, in accordance with the principle omni malum ad omen, as a result of man's wickedness. All the same, the addition in obscura luna, for which there is no warrant in the original text, shows how much the new moon is involved. This hint of the admitted dangerousness of the moon is confirmed when Augustine, a few sentences later, cites Psalm 71:7, quote, "In his days justice shall flourish, and abundance of peace, until the moon shall be destroyed." Footnote, "Oritur incit in deibus ius justitia et abundantiae pacis, quod usque interfictiatur luna." End of footnote. Instead of the strong interfictur, the Vulgate has the milder auferatur, shall be taken away or fail. Footnote. In his days justice shall flourish, and abundance of peace until the moon shall fail. End footnote. The violent way in which the moon is removed is explained by the interpretation that immediately follows, quote, "That is, the abundance of peace shall grow until it consumes all changefulness of morality." End of footnote. End of quote. From this it is evident that the moon's nature expressly partakes of the changefulness of morality, which is equivalent to death, and therefore the text continues, quote, "For then the last enemy, death, shall be destroyed, and whatever resists us on account of the weakness of the flesh shall be utterly consumed." Here the destruction of the moon is manifestly equivalent to the destruction of death. Footnote. Augustine further remarks the name Jericho means moon in Hebrew, and that the walls of the city, the walls of mortal life, collapsed. End of footnote. The moon and death significantly reveal their affinity. Death came into the world through original sin, and the seductiveness of women equals moon, and mutability led to corruptibility. Footnote. According to Origen, the sun and the moon were involved in the fall, cited in Runer Mysterium Lunae. End footnote. To eliminate the moon from creation is therefore as desirable as the elimination of death. This negative assessment of the moon takes full account of her dark side, the dying of the Church also connected with the mystery of the moon's darkness. A footnote. Rahner speaks very aptly of the mystical darkness of the moon's, the Church's union with Christ at the time of the new moon, the latter signifying the dying Church. End footnote. Augustine's cautious and perhaps not altogether unconscious disguising of the sinister aspect of the moon would be sufficiently explained by his respect for the Ecclesia Luna equation. All the more ruthlessly, therefore, does alchemy insist on the dangerousness of the new moon. Luna is on the one hand the brilliant whiteness of the full moon. On the other hand, she is the blackness of the new moon, and especially the blackness of the eclipse, when the sun is darkened. Indeed, what she does to the sun comes from her own dark nature. The Mysterium Coniuntionis, footnote, the first printing in Ars Chemica, tells us very clearly what the alchemists thought about Luna. So the first printing was in 1566, so let's read it. "The lion, the lower sun," footnote, the text has id es sol inferius, and so has the latter printing 1620, as well as Manget's Bible Chemique. It could therefore mean the sun below. This would presumably be a subterranean sun, equivalent to Sol Niger and Ripley, from Laius and Ripley. End footnote. So I'll start over again. "The lion, the lower sun, grows corrupt through the flesh. His flesh is weak because he suffers from quartan fever. Footnote. The quartan fever occurs every 4th day. The text here was, for on every 4th day he naturally suffers from a quartan fever. And footnote. This is the lion. Footnote. Leo, as the domicilium solis stands for the sun, for the active red Mercurius. So this is the lion, corrupted in his nature through his flesh, which follows the times of the moon. Footnote. Per carnem suam sibi contemporaneum lunarem vilisquit. The original Arab text of Senior has Gainem instead of Garnem. The dog is Hecate's animal and pertains to the moon. In Manichaeism, it is said of the original man and his sons, who descended into matter, that consciousness was taken from them, and they became like one who was bitten by a mad dog or a snake. Kolnay, cited in Reisenstein and Schneider. Okay, and a footnote. So that's right there. So thus is the lion corrupted in his nature through his flesh, which follows the times of the moon, and is eclipsed. For the moon is in the shadow of the sun, and which corruptible bodies she has consumed, and through her corruption is the lion eclipsed with the help of the moisture of Mercurius. Footnote, the aqua permanens. End footnote. Yet his eclipse is changed to usefulness and to a better nature, and to one more perfect than the first. The changefulness of the moon and her ability to grow dark are interpreted as her corruptibility, and this negative quality can even darken the sun. The text continues. During the increase that is, during the fullness of the blackness of the lead, which is our ore, my light, footnote, soul is speaking, my light is absent and my splendor is put out. Then comes a passage which may have inspired the picture of the death of the royal pair in Rosarium, but which is also significant as regards the dark side of the conjunctium of Sol and Luna. Footnote, Concilium Coniuncti. Okay. After this, footnote, the preceding passage runs, let the residual body, which is called earth, be reduced to ashes, from which the tincture is extracted by means of water. Then join it to its head and tail. This refers to the production of the Ouroboros as the arcane substance that changes the nature. And a footnote. After this is complete, you will know that you have substance which penetrates all substances, and the nature which contains nature, and the nature which rejoins nature. Footnote. This is the well-known formula of Democritus. Nature rejoices in nature, nature subdues nature, nature rules over nature. End footnote. It is named the Tyraic. Footnote. Tyria tinctura or tyria color, lapis tyrii colores. Quote, thus we call our Tyrian color, at each step of the procedure by the name of its color. Quote, this is the red sulfur, shining in the darkness. It is the red jacinth, and the fiery and death-dealing poison, and the conquering lion, and the evildoer, and the cleaving sword, and the Tyrian tincture that heals all infirmities. Tyricia is identical with Tyrica, which is none other than the arcane substance. End of footnote. So it is named Tyriac, which we just read that footnote, of the philosophers. And it is also called the poisonous serpent, because like this it bites off the head of the male in the lustful heat of conception, and giving birth it dies, and is divided through the midst. So also the moisture of the moon, footnote, Luna sends the dew, the moisture of the moon, when she perceives his light, slays the sun, and at the birth of the child of the philosophers she dies likewise. And at death the two parents yield up their souls to the sun, and die, and pass away, and the parents are the food of the sun. End of quote. In this psychologium, all the implications of the soul-luna allegory are carried to their logical conclusion. The daimonic quality, which is connected with the dark side of the moon, or with her position midway between between heaven and the sublunary world, footnote, where the aerial realm of the demons and Saturn begins. So the sublunary world, where the aerial realm of the demons and Satan begins. Okay. Display its full effect. Sun and moon reveal their antithetical nature, which in the Christian soul-lunar relationship is so obscured as to be unrecognizable, and the two opposites cancel each other out, their impact resulting, in accordance with the laws of energetics, in the birth of a third and new thing, a son who resolves the antagonisms of the parents, and is himself a united double nature. The unknown author of the Concilium, footnote, Schmeider thinks the author was an Arab of the 13th century. The fact that the author took over Canaan, a mistake possible only in Latin, shows, however, that he must have been one of the early Latinists. And the unknown author of Concilium was not conscious of the close connection in his psychologium with the prospects of transubstantiation, although the last sentence of the text contains clearly enough the motif of the Tioqualo, or the god eating of the Aztecs. Footnote. Bernardino, The Origin of the Gods, also transformation symbolism in the Mass. End footnote. This motif is also found in ancient Egypt. The pyramid text of Unas, the 5th dynasty, says, Unas rising as a soul, like a god who liveth upon his fathers and feedeth upon his mothers. Footnote 158. Wallace Bridge, The Gods of the Egyptians. And a footnote. It should be noted how alchemy put in the place of the Christian sponsus and sponsa an image of totality, which on the one hand was material, on the other hand was spiritual, and corresponded to the paraskliti. In addition, there is a certain trend in the direction of ecclesial spiritualis. The alchemical equivalent of the God-man and the Son of God was Mercurius, who was a hermaphrodite, who as a hermaphrodite contained in himself both female elements, sapientia and matter, and the masculine, the Holy Ghost and the devil. There are relations in alchemy with the Holy Ghost movement which flourished in the 13th and 14th centuries, and was chiefly connected with the name of Joachim of Flora, 1145 to 1202, who expected the imminent coming of the, quote, third kingdom, namely that of the Holy Ghost. Footnote. See my account in Axion. End of footnote. The alchemists who represented the eclipse as the descent of the sun into the feminine mercurial fountain, footnote, the Koran Surah, the sun setting in a pool of black mud, end of footnote, or as a disappearance of Gabricius in the body of Bea. Again, the sun is the embrace of the new moon. The sun in the embrace of the new moon is treacherously slain by the snake bite, conatu viperoino, of the mother beloved, or pierced by the telis passionis, Cupid's arrow. Footnote. Ripley Opera Omnia, Concilium Coniuntionis. He slew himself with his own dart, Rosinus Adsarat. Who with an arrow from our quiver, bound together, that is joined in one body, wretched me, that is I who possess the matter of Mercury and the moon, and my beloved, that is the fatness of the sun and the moisture of the moon. This picture is reproduced in my Paracelsus as a spiritual phenomenon. End of footnote. Alright, so I'll start the sentence again. Again, the sun in the embrace of the new moon is treacherously slain by the snake bite, conatu viperino, of the mother beloved, or pierced by the telum passionis, Cupid's arrow. These ideas explain the strange picture in Rosam's Pandora. Footnote. Let's see. The picture is reproduced in my Paracelsus as a spiritual phenomenon, figure B4, end of footnote. So showing Christ being pierced with a lance by a crowned virgin whose body ends in a serpent's tail. Footnote. The drawing of this tail is certainly odd, and one wonders whether it represents water or stream. The prototype of the picture can be found in the so-called Drivaltig Kaischbusch, Codex Germanicus Monosium 598, 15th century, as well as the Codex Germ Alch Vad, 16th century. There she had a proper snake's tail. Our text describes the vapors as arrows, the eagles armed with arrows in the picture of Hermes Trismegistus from Senior. End of footnote. Let's see. 63 there. The oldest reference to the mermaid in Alchemy is a quotation from Hermes in Olympodorus. The virginal earth is found in the tail of the virgin. Footnote. Berthelot. End of footnote. On the analogy of the wounded Christ, Adam is shown in the Codex Ashburnham pierced by in the side by an arrow. This motif of wounding is taken up by Honoras of Autum in his commentary on the Song of Songs. Footnote. Ming. Okay, end of footnote. The Song of Songs. Thou hast wounded my heart, dear sister, my spouse. Thou hast wounded my heart with one of thy eyes, and with one hair of thy neck. The sponsa says, I am black but comely. Look not upon me because I am black, because the sun hath scorched me. This allusion to the nigredo was not misused by the alchemists. Footnote. See Aurora Consurgens. End footnote. But there is another and more dangerous reference to the bride in 6.4f. Thou art beautiful, O my love, as Tirzah, comely as Jerusalem, terrible as an army with banners. Turn away thine eyes from me, for thou hast overcome me. Who is this that looketh forth as the rising dawn, quasi aurora consurgens? Footnote. Here is, significantly enough, the source of the title of the mysterious treatise discussed in von Franz, which complements the present work. End of footnote. The bride is not only lovely. No, sorry, I missed a footnote there. So who looketh forth as rising dawn? Okay. Who is this that looketh forth as the rising dawn, aurora consurgens, fair as the moon, bright as the sun, terrible as an army with banners? So let's read this footnote. A more exact translation of the original text would be terrible as a host of armies. The Hebrew root nidgailot is read by recent commentaries as nirigalot, plural of nirgal or nirgal. The Babylonian Nirgal was the god of war and the underworld, the lord of spirits, and the god of the midday heat of summer. Whitkind, therefore, translates terrible as the planets. Evidently the opposite of the figure of Ishtar was meant. She is the gracious goddess of love and beauty, but she is also warlike, a slayer of men. On account of his magic, even great consideration should be given to the underworld aspect of Nigral as the lord of spirits. The reading Nirgalot is also acceptable by Haller. Hebrew D and R are very easily confused. End of footnote. The bride is not only lovely and innocent, but witch-like and terrible, like the sea of Selene, which is related to Hecate. Like her, Luna is all-seeing, an all-knowing eye. Like Hecate, she sends madness, epilepsy, and other sickness. Her special field is love magic and magic in general, in which the new moon, the full moon, and the moon's darkness play a great part. The animals assigned to her, stag, lion, cock, footnote, nothing, never mind, and cock, are also symbols of her male partner in alchemy. As the Cathronic Persephone, her animals, according to Pythagoras, are dogs. The planets. In alchemy, Luna herself appears as the Armenian bitch. Footnote, the psychology of transference. End of footnote. The sinister side of the moon plays a considerable role in classical tradition. The sponsa is the new moon. In Christian interpretation, the church is the nuptial embrace. Footnote. In the Kabbalistic interpretation, she is Israel, bride of the Lord. Thus the Zohar say, and when is he, God, called one? Only at that hour when the matrona, Malchuth, will pair with the king, and the kingdom will belong to God, as is said. What is meant by kingdom? It is the children of Israel, for the king unites himself with her, as is said, on that day God is known as one. End of footnote. Start over. The sponsa is the dark new moon in Christian interpretation, the church and the nuptial embrace. There's that footnote. And this union is at the same time a wounding of the sponsus soul or Christ. Honorius comments on "Thou hast wounded my heart" as follows. By heart is signified love, which is said to be in the heart, and the container is put in the place of the contained. And this metaphor is taken from the lover, who loves his beloved exceeding so much, so that his heart is wounded with love. So is Christ upon the cross wounded for love of his church. Footnote. Augustine, Sermono Suppositus, says, like a bridegroom, Christ went forth from his chamber. He went out with his presage of his nuptials into the field of the world. He came to the marriage bed of the cross, and there, in the mounting it, he consummated his marriage. And when he perceived the sighs of the creature, he lovingly gave himself to the torment in the place of his bride, and he joined the woman to him forever. End footnote. Thou didst first wound my heart when I was scourged for thy love, that I might make thee my sister. Again thou didst wound my heart with one of thine eyes. Footnote. It is remarkable that in ancient Egypt as well, the eye is connected with the hierogamos of the gods. The first day of autumn, i.e. the dwindling sun, is celebrated in the Heliopolitan inscriptions as the, quote, feast of the goddess Usasit, as the arrival of the sister who makes ready to unite herself with her father. On that day, the goddess Mehnit completes her work so that the god Osiris may enter into the left eye. Bruch, Religion und Mythologie der Altem Ägyptier. End of footnote. So, again thou didst wound my heart with one of thine eyes, when, hanging upon the cross, I was wounded for love of thee, that I might make thee my bride to share my glory. Footnote. Honorius, the wounding of the Redeemer by love, is an idea that gave rise to some curious images among the later mystic writers. The following is from Libellus Desiderium Joannis Amati. Quote, I have learnt an art, and have become an archer. Good intention is my bow, and the ceaseless desires of my soul are the arrows. The bow is spanned continually by the hand of God's gracious help, and the Holy Ghost teaches me to shoot the arrows straight to heaven. God grant that I may learn to shoot better and one day hit the Lord Jesus. Held Angelus Silesius Samlich Poetci Wirke. And a footnote. The moment of the eclipse and the mystic marriage is death on the cross. In the Middle Ages, the cross was therefore logically understood as the mother. Thus, in the Middle English, dispute between Mary and the cross. The cross is a false tree that destroyed Mary's fruit with a deadly drink. She laments, "My son's stepmother, I call thee." Sancta Cruz replies, "Lady, to thee I owe honor. Thy fruit me flourisheth in blood color." The motif of wounding in alchemy goes back to Zosimos, 3rd century, and his vision of the sacrificial drama. Footnote. Berthelot. The aspect of killing is discussed in The Visions of Zosimos, and the sacrificial death in Transformation Symbolism in the Mass. End of footnote. The motif does not occur in such complete form again. One next meets it in the Turba, quote, "The dew was joined to him who was wounded and given over to death." Footnote. Ruska Turba. The dew comes from the moon, and he who was wounded in the sun. Footnote. The alchemical dew penetrates the gold sun by amalgamation. End of footnote. In the treatise of Philalethem, Introitius apertus ad oculosum regis palatium. Footnotes. The treatise is supposed to have been written in 1645. The name of the author, Irenaeus Philalethe, is a pseudonym, peaceful lover of truth. The real author is conjectured to be the English alchemist Thomas Vaghan, Vaghan. Incorrectly, it seems to me. See Waite, the works of Thomas Vaghan and Ferguson. And a footnote. So again, in the treatise of Philalethe, Introitius apertus ad oculusum regis palatium, the wounding is caused by the bite of the rabid Khorassin dog, in consequence of which the hermaphrodite child suffered from hydrophobia. Footnote. This is the infant hermaphrodite who from his very cradle has been bitten by the mad Khorassin dog, wherefore he rages in madness with perpetual fear of water, hydrophobia. The rabid black dog is chased away with water and blows, and thus will the darkness be dispelled. For this it can be seen that the mad dog represents the Nigrido, and thus indifferently the dark new moon, which eclipses the sun. Leo, and then Signor Dicemi, quote, "Leo decays weakened by the dog flesh." The infant would correspond to the raging Attis, Catatethus Actusma, Beas, the dark rumor of Rhea, whom the Assyrians call the thrice desired Adonis, the sun lover who dies young. Hippolytus. According to the legend of Pessinus, Agdistis, the mother of Attis, was herself hermaphroditic at first, but was castrated by the gods. She drove Attis mad, so that he did the same thing to himself at his wedding. Zeus made his body incorruptible, and this forms the parallel to the incorruptibilis of the alchemical infant. End of footnote. So, Dorn, in his De Tenebris Contra Naturam, associates the motif of wounding and the poisonous snake bite with Genesis 3, quote, for the sickness introduced into nature by the serpent, and the deadly wound she inflicted a remedy to be sought. Footnote 186, okay, Theatra Chemica, end of footnote. Accordingly, it is the task of alchemy to root out the original sin, and this is accomplished with the aid of balsamum vitae, balsam of life, which is, quote, a true mixture of the natural heat with its radical moisture. The life of the world is the light of nature and the celestial sulfur. Footnote. Lux naturae and celeste sulfur are to be understood as identical. So the light of the world and the celestial sulfur, whose substance is the etheric moisture and the heat of the firmament, like to the sun and the moon. The conjunction of the moist moon and the hot sun thus produces the balsam, which is the, quote, original and incorrupt life of the world. Genesis 3:15, quote, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel, was generally taken as a prefiguration of the Redeemer, but since Christ was free from the stain of sin, the wiles of the serpent could not touch him, though of course mankind was poisoned. Whereas the Christian belief is that man is freed from sin by the redemptory act of Christ, the alchemist was evidently of the opinion that the restitution to the likeness of original and incorrupt nature has still to be accomplished by the art, and thus can only mean that Christ's work of redemption was regarded as incomplete. In view of the wickedness which the prince of this world, John, footnote John, unquote, unfootnote, end of footnote, undeterred, goes on perpetuating as liberally as before, one cannot withhold all sympathy from such an opinion. For an alchemist who professed allegiance to the ecclesial spiritualis, it was naturally of supreme importance to make himself an unspotted vessel of the Paraclete, and thus to realize the idea Christ on a plane so far transcending a mere imitation of him. It is tragic to see how this tremendous thought got bogged down again and again in the welter of human folly. A shattering example of this is afforded not only by the history of the Church, but above all by alchemy itself, which richly merited its own condemnation, in ironical fulfillment of the dictum Inster quin lineis inventur. It is found in cesspools. Agrippa von Netzsheim was not far wrong when he opined that chemists are of all men are the most perverse. Footnote. Zeitschrift end of footnote. In his Mysterium Lunae are an extremely valuable study for the history of alchemical symbolism. Rahner mentioned that the waxing and waning of the bride, Luna Ecclesia, is based on the kenosis. A kenosis is emptying of the bridegroom, in accordance with the words of St. Ambrose. Luna is diminished that she may fill the elements. Therefore, in this a great mystery, to her it was given by him who confers grace upon all things. He emptied her that he might fill her, as he also emptied himself that he might fill all things. He emptied himself that he might come down to us. He came down to us that he might rise again for all. Thus has Luna proclaimed the mystery of Christ. Footnote. Professor Renner was kind enough to send me the following explanation. Quote, the fundamental idea of the theologians is always this: the earthly fate of the Church as the body of Christ is modeled on the earthly fate of Christ himself. That is to say, the Church, in the course of her history, moves towards a death, as well in her individual members. Here is the connecting link with the doctrine of mortification, as in her destiny as a whole, until that dark day when, after fulfilling her earthly task, she becomes unnecessary and dies, as indicated in Psalm 71:7, quote, until the moon shall fail. These ideas were expressed in the symbolism of Luna as the Church. Just as the kenosis of Christ was fulfilled in death, even death on the cross, and out of this death the glory of the divine nature was bestowed on Christ form as a servant. Whence the whole process can be compared with the setting, death, of the sun and the rising anew, glory. Even so it is with the parallel gnosis of Ecclesia Luna. The closer Luna approaches to the sun, the more she is darkened until, at the conjunction of the new moon, all her light is emptied into Christ, the sun. It is well worth noting that just at this point Augustine speaks of the strange speculations of the Manichaeans about the two light ships, when the ship of Luna pours out its light into the ship of the sun. Epistola. Augustine now applies this to the individual Christians of whom Ecclesia is composed. The remarkable paradox of Luna, that she is darkest when nearest the sun, is a symbol of Christian asceticism. Quote, "The more the inward man draws nigh to the sun, the more is the outward man destroyed, but the inward man is renewed from day to day," a variation of 2 Corinthians. That is, the Christian dies like Luna, and his life is hid with Christ in God. All this Augustine says in Epistola. Afterwards, he applies it to the Church and her destiny. She will vanish into Christ, the Son, at the end of time. Donec interficiatur luna. Augustine here translates the Antanairiti of Psalms by interficiatur. In his Eneratio, he expatiates on the translation of this Greek word, where renders it by tolatur is removed and offeratur taken away. The doctrine implied in all these passages is that the Church in her future glory, ceases her work of salvation, which is destined only for earth, and that she is totally eclipsed by the splendor of Christ the Son, and because, and this again is a strange paradox, in the resurrection of flesh she has become the full moon, and indeed the sun. Permanebit cum sole. She shall live while the sun endures. End of footnote. Thus the changefulness of the moon is paralleled by the transformation of the pre-existent Christ from a divine into a human figure through the emptying, that passage in Philippians, which has aroused so much comment, quote, "Who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equally with God a thing to be clung to, but emptied himself, taking the form of servant, being born in the likeness of men." Footnote. Os en theou uparxan urux arpagmon egesorto to ainan isatheo ala eoton ek ken nausen marthen dulon laban. I'll just say here that we have no idea what ancient Greek sounded like, so if I'm butchering it, who knows? Okay, the only word we know is eta, because there's an allusion to it sounding like a goat going eh. Okay, enough of that. Back to the text. Even the most tortuous explanations of theology have never improved on the lapidary paradox of St. Hilary. Deus homo immortalis mortus, aeternus sepultus. God, man, immortal, dead, eternal, buried. Footnotes. De Trinitati. The passage says literally, "Hence, just as the truths that God became man, that the immortal died, that the eternal was buried, so do belong to the order of the rational intellect, but are an exceptional work of power. So it is an effect not of intellect but of omnipotence that he who is man is likewise God, and he who died is immortal, and he who is buried is eternal. End of footnote. According to Ephraim Sirius, the kenosis had the reverse effect of unburdening creation. Quote, because the creatures were wary of bearing the prefigurations of his glory, he disburdened them of those prefigurations, even as he had disburdened the womb that bore him. St. Ambrose's reference to the kenosis makes this changing of the moon casually dependent on the transformation of the bridegroom, the darkening of Luna that depends on the sponsus soul, and here the alchemists could refer to the darkening of the beloved's countenance in Songs of Songs 1:4.5. The sun, too, is equipped with darts and arrows. Indeed, the secret poisoning that otherwise emulates from the coldness and moisture of the moon is occasionally attributed to the cold dragon, who contains a volatile fiery spirit and spits flames. Thus an emblem L of the scrutinium, footnote, Meyer, okay. He is given a masculine role. He wraps the woman in the grave in a deadly embrace. The same thought occurs again in emblem 5, where the toad is laid on the breast of the woman, so that she, suckling it, may die as it grows. The toad is a cold and damp animal like the dragon. It empties the woman as though the moon were pouring herself into the sun. 4. Alchemy and Manichaeism. Manichaeism. At the beginning of the last section, I mentioned the term orphan for the lapis. Here the motif of the unknown or absent father seems to be of special importance. Mani is the best known example of son of the widow. His original name was said to be Kubrikos. Later he changed it to Manus, a Babylonian word meaning vessel. Footnote, Epiphanius, Hegemonius, Socrates, Scholastus, anyway, on and on. Okay. As a 4-year-old boy, he was sold as a slave to a rich widow. She came to love him and later adopted him and made him her heir. Together with her wealth, he inherited the serpent's poison of his doctrine, the 4 books of Scythianos, the original master of his adopted father, Terebinthos, named Buddha. Footnote. This might be a reference to Buddhism. The Manichaean theory of metapsychosis may possibly come from the same source. Scythianos is said to have traveled to India. According to Suidas' lexicon, Scythianus Manus was a Brahmanus, a Brahmin. Okay, end of footnote. Of this Scythianos, there is a legendary biography which equates him with Simon Magus. Like him, he is said to have come to Jerusalem at the time of the apostles. He propounded a dualistic doctrine, which, according to Epiphanius, was concerned with pairs of opposites, white and black, yellow and green, moist and dry, heaven and earth, night and day, soul and body, good and evil, right and wrong. From these books, Mani concocted his pernicious heresy, which poisoned the nation. Kubricus is very like the alchemical Kybrius. So we have footnotes in all of these, a lot of these that give to references to where the word comes from. I'm not going to read them. Gabricus, Kilbric, Kybrik, Kibrik, Kybrig, Kebrik, Alkibric, Kibrit, Kibrith, Gabricius, Gabrius, Fabritius, Fabritus, and so on. Yeah. And so on. The name Kubricus from Mani has so far not been satisfactorily explained. End of footnote. The Arabic word Kibrit means sulfur. In the Aurora Consurgens, sulfur nigrum stands side by side with Vetunla, the first being a synonym for spirit and the second for soul. Together they form a pair roughly comparable to the devil and his grandmother. This relationship also occurs in Rosenkreuz's Chemical Wedding, where a black king sits beside a veiled old woman. The black sulfur is a pejorative name for the active masculine substance of Mercurius, and points to its dark, saturnine nature, which is evil. This is the wicked Moorish king of the Chemical Wedding. Who makes the king's daughter his concubine? Meretrix, the Ethiopian of other treatises. Footnote. Psychology and Alchemy, Aurora Consurgens, page 57. Quote, the shadow of death, for a tempest hath overwhelmed me. Then before me shall the Ethiopians fall down, and my enemies shall lick my earth. In Origin, he who participates in the dragon is none other than the Ethiopian spiritually, himself changed into a serpent. And then Chadwick and Epithernius speaks of the Ethiopes denigriti pecco, Ethiopians blackened by sin. Okay, end of footnote. And that, so Ethiopian of other treatises analogous to the Egyptian in the Passio Perpetue. Who, from the Christian point of view, is the devil. He who is activated darkness of matter, the umbria solis, shadow of the sun, which represents the virginal maternal prima materia. When the doctrine of the increatum, footnote, cf. Paracelsius Philosophia ad Atheniensis, end of footnote, began to play a role in alchemy during the 16th century, it gave rise to a dualism which might be compared with the Manichaean teachings. Footnote. The unbegotten Father and the unbegotten Earth and the unbegotten Air of the Manichaeans, mentioned by Bardesanes and Marcinus and by Hermogenes. Quote, God created all things from coexistent and ungenerated matter. End quote. End of footnote. In the Manichaean system, matter, Heli, is personified by the dark, fluid human body of the evil principle. As St. Augustine says, the substance of evil, quote, had its own hideous and formless bulk, either gross, which they called earth, or thin and tenuous like the air, for they imagine it to be some malignant mind creeping over earth. The Manichaean doctrine of the Anthropos shares the dual form of its Christ figure with alchemy, insofar as the latter also has a dualistic redeemer, Christ as savior of people, microcosm, and the Lapis Philosophorum, a savior of the macrocosm. The doctrine presupposes, on the one hand, a Christ incapable of suffering, impatibilis, who takes care of souls, and on the other hand, a Christ capable of suffering, patibilus. Footnote. Augustine, Reply to Faustus. End of footnote. Whose role is something like that of a spiritus vegetavitus or Mercurius. This spirit is imprisoned in the body of the princes of darkness and is freed as follows by angelic beings who dwell in the sun and moon, assuming alternately male and female form. They excite the desires of the wicked and cause them to break out in a sweat of fear, which falls upon earth and fertilizes the vegetation. Footnote. Let's find that footnote. It's on the preceding page. No, it's right here. Augustine, The Nature of the Good. Earlier writings, translated by Burleigh. Okay, so it fertilizes the vegetation. In this matter, the heavenly light material is freed from the dark bodies and passes into plant form. Footnote. Faust II, the angel seen at Faust's death. Mephistopheles Thales is addressing the angels. Us spirits you call damned, and look askance. Which, masters, you par excellence, for man and maid you lead astray. What an adventure cursed and dire is this love's eternal game. Faust Part 2, translated by Wayne. And footnote. The inflammation by desire has its analogy in the alchemist's gradual warming of the substances that contain the arcanum. Here the symbol of the sweat bath plays an important role, as the illustration shows. Footnote. Meyer. Laurentius Venturi de ratione conficiende lapidis. The stone begins to sweat because of the narrowness of its prison. End of footnote. Just as for the Manchaeans, the sweat of the Archaeans signifies rain. Footnote. Hegemonius. Quote, this prince sweats because of his tribulation, and his sweat is rain. Christensen. Les types de premier homme et de premier roi dans l'histoire légionnaire des Iraniens. Quote from the Bundahism. The Ormuds fashioned a shining youth from his sweat, and that the first men were made from the sweat of Ymir. According to Arabic tradition, Ormuz sweated because of his doubting thought. See my answer to Job, paragraph 579. From this doubting thought came Abrimon, and from his sweat Gaiamart. In ancient Egypt, the gods of the seasons brought forth the harvest with the sweat of Osiris' hands. Dorn has the following remarkable passage on the lapis, quote, in its last operations a dark liquid, ruddy like blood, drips from the matter in its vessel, whence they predicted that in the last days there would come upon the earth a most pure man, through whom would be brought about the liberation of the world, and he would give forth drops of blood of rose-red hue, whereby the world would be redeemed from the fall. The Philosophical Tree. End of footnote. Okay. All right. So just as the Manichaeans, the sweat of the Achaeans signified rain, and we read that footnote, so for the alchemists, sweat meant dew. Footnote. And Marcus said, they conceived us in the baths, signifying the gentle and damp heat of the baths in which the stone sweats when it begins to dissolve. This passage is a commentary on Senior. The Epistola ad Hermannum says, then the most perfect body is taken and applied to the fire of the philosophers. Then that body becomes moist and gives forth a kind of bloody sweat after the putrefaction and mortification, that is, a heavenly dew, and this dew is called the mercury of the philosophers, or aqua permens. So the Creator, making the first man out of sweat in Aloud, who mentions this in connection with a sweat bath. End of that footnote. Okay. So, in this connection, we should also mention that the strange legend reported in the Acta Archelae concerning the apparatus which the Son of the Living Father invented to save human souls. He constructed a great wheel with 12 buckets, which, as they revolved, scooped up the soul from the deep and deposited them on the moon ship. Footnote. Text on Psychology and Alchemy. End of footnote. In alchemy, the rota is a symbol of opus circulatorium. Like the alchemists, the Manichaeans had a virago, the male virgin, Joel. Footnote. The parallel to Barbello. End of footnote. Who gave Eve a certain amount of light substance. Footnote. And when it appears, it is a comely woman to men, but to woman it has the appearance of a beautiful and desirable youth. End of footnote. The role she plays in regards to the princess of darkness corresponds to that of Mercurius Duplex, who, like her, sets free the secrets hidden in matter. the light above all lights, the filius philosophorum. I would not venture to decide how much in these parallels it is to be ascribed directly to the Manchurian tradition, how much to indirect influence, and how much to spontaneous revival. Our starting point for those remarks was the designation of the lapis as orphan, which Dorn mentions apparently out of the blue when discussing the union of opposites. The material we have adduced shows that an archetypical drama of death and rebirth lies hidden in the conjunctio, and that immemorial human emotion clash together in this problem. It is the moral task of alchemy to bring the feminine maternal background of the masculine psyche, seething with passions, into harmony with the principle of the spirit, truly a labor of Hercules, in Dorn's words. Learn therefore, O mind, to practice sympathetic love in regard to thine own body, by restraining its vain appetites, that it may be apt with thee in all things. To this end I shall labor, that it may drink with thee from the fountain of strength. Footnote. Est omnium virtus fides vera, the strength of man is true faith. End of footnote. And when the two are made one, that you find peace in their union. Draw, night, O body, to this fountain, that with thy mind thou mayest drink to satiety, and hereafter thirst no more after vanities. O wondrous efficacy of this font, which maketh one of two and peace between enemies! The font of love can make mind out of spirit and soul, but this maketh one man of mind and body. End of chapter 1. Reader's comments, to be taken with a grain of salt or pepper or whatever you like. So Ajahn Sumedho, it said in one of his recent talks that the reason that we don't get along is that we're living in different worlds. And in another talk, he talks about how every person is the center of the universe and experiences everything through their own, whatever you want to call it, mind, body, presence, experience of consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. And I found that to be really profound. And in reading this, what I think about is that Jung is experiencing the world, through himself, and also within the context of a very Christian world. That a lot of the traditions and the perceptions that he has are through the filter of the written word. Humans have existed as spiritual beings for a lot longer than there has been a written word. And the concept of integrity, of wholeness, and the quartinio, and the circle, I think is something that is innate to spirituality, because what is our purpose in life? And one could think of our purpose in life as to be living in heaven, to be living as one with Great Spirit, consciousness, or God, or whatever you want to think of it, and that's when we really are fully integrated. Where I depart from Jung on this is the concept of the different aspects, so what I call it, male, female, right, left, north, south, spring, fall, birth, and death. Where I depart there is this idea that they are in opposition. I think that this is much more of a more modern concept to humanity, and I think that we can, and of course this is just my thoughts, I think that we can go to what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to be human in a way that feels good, as opposed to what it feels dangerous and difficult, and is a lot of striving, or what we would call in Buddhism efforting, is where there is no opposite, there are just different sides, and it's about the middle road, and the middle road is defined by the opposites, but the opposites aren't opposites, they're two sides of the same coin, if you want to think of it that way. I think there's a lot of wisdom in some of our very unknown and old sayings. So I also have a little bit of issue with the emphasis on males, and of course this is in a context when man was considered to be a word that indicated humankind and people, and I'm grateful that we are changing that, and I change sometimes in my reading, and if you don't like that, too bad, or in French, tant pis. But I think that language, spirit, and culture are changed by our words, and how we express them is part of hopefully our evolution, and that we come to more and more to a place of wholeness and togetherness, and of not seeing each other as opposites or as an opposition, the right versus the left, the straight versus the non-straight, the young versus the old, or whatever. So thank you for listening if you listened.